My husband always told me never to open the basement door. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I met Thomas on a Tuesday afternoon in October when the leaves were burning orange and the air smelled like cinnamon and rain. He was standing in the poetry section of the bookstore where I worked part-time, running his fingers along the spines of old volumes with a gentleness that caught my attention. When he looked up and smiled, I felt something shift inside my chest, something warm and unexpected. He was handsome in an understated way, tall, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and eyes so deep brown they looked almost black in the dim bookstore light. He wore a wool sweater and wire-rimmed glasses, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, careful, like someone who weighed every word before releasing it into the world. "Do you have any Rilke?" he asked. I did. I showed him to the shelf, and we talked about poetry for 20 minutes while the rain started drumming against the windows. He bought 3 books that day and came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. By the 4th visit, he asked me to coffee. Our courtship was slow and sweet. Thomas was a high school history teacher, devoted to his students, passionate about the past. He would tell me stories about ancient civilizations over dinner, his eyes lighting up when he described the fall of Rome or the construction of the pyramids. He was kind, patient, thoughtful. He remembered everything I told him. My favorite flower, peonies, my childhood fear of thunderstorms, the name of my first pet. But there were things about him I couldn't quite understand. He had nightmares, terrible ones. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find him sitting up in bed, his face pale and slick with sweat, his hands trembling. When I asked what he'd dreamed about, he'd shake his head and pull me close, pressing his face into my hair. "Just the dark," he'd whisper. "I'm afraid of the dark." It seemed strange for a grown man to admit such a thing, but I found it endearing in a way. Vulnerable. He always slept with a lamp on, a small nightlight glowing in the corner of our bedroom. I learned to sleep through it. We married in the spring, in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just a few friends as witnesses. Thomas didn't have family. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 19, and he was an only child. I didn't press him about it. Everyone has losses they don't want to discuss. We moved into his house, a 2-story Victorian on the edge of town, set back from the road and surrounded by tall pine trees that whispered in the wind. It was beautiful in a Gothic sort of way, with high ceilings, crown molding, and hardwood floors that creaked under our feet. I loved it immediately. There was just one rule. "Don't go in the basement," Thomas said on our first night there, as he carried my boxes up the front steps. He said it casually, almost as an afterthought, but something in his tone made me stop. "Why not?" He set the box down and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "The wiring down there is old, dangerous. I keep meaning to get it fixed, but I haven't had the time. And besides," he gave a self-deprecating laugh, "you know how I am about the dark. It's pitch black down there, and I don't like it. There's nothing interesting anyway, just old junk and dust." I kissed his cheek. "Okay, I won't." And I didn't. Not for 3 years. Life with Thomas was quiet and comfortable. He taught during the day, and I worked at the bookstore and took freelance editing jobs from home. We had dinner together every evening, sometimes by candlelight, sometimes in front of the television. He was attentive, affectionate, always asking about my day, always interested in what I was reading or thinking about. But there were small things, strange things, that accumulated over time like dust in the corners of a room. He always kept the basement door locked. Always. He wore the key on a chain around his neck, tucked beneath his shirt, and I never saw him take it off, not even in the shower. Sometimes, late at night, I heard sounds from below, soft sounds creaking floorboards, the whisper of something dragging across concrete. Once, I could have sworn I heard footsteps. When I mentioned it to Thomas, he laughed it off. "Old houses settle," he said. "Pipes expand and contract. You're hearing the bones of the place shifting." I wanted to believe him. There was also a smell that occasionally drifted up through the vents, musty and sweet, like old flowers left too long in a vase. Thomas said it was mold, that he'd deal with it eventually. And then there were the nights when he'd disappear for hours. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and find his side of the bed empty and cold. The first time it happened, I panicked, searching the house until I found him sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, his hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Didn't want to wake you." But it kept happening. Once a week, sometimes more. I'd find him downstairs or in his study, or standing at the window looking out at the dark yard. He never explained, and I stopped asking. I told myself every marriage has its mysteries. Every person has their private corners, their inexplicable habits. Thomas was good to me. He loved me. That was what mattered. Until the day he died. It happened without warning. He was 42 years old, healthy, active. He'd gone for his usual morning run, come home, showered, kissed me goodbye as he left for work. At 2:47 p.m., I got a call from the school principal. Thomas had collapsed in his classroom. A brain aneurysm, they said. Catastrophic. He was dead before the ambulance arrived. The funeral was small. Thomas's colleagues came, some former students, a few neighbors. I stood beside his casket in a black dress I'd bought the day before, numb and uncomprehending. People offered condolences that I barely heard. The words floated past me like smoke. They buried him on a gray Thursday morning, and I went home to a house that felt twice as large and infinitely empty. For 2 weeks, I moved through the rooms like a ghost. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. Friends called, and I didn't answer. The bookstore manager told me to take all the time I needed. I spent hours sitting in Thomas's study, touching his books, his papers, trying to feel close to him. It was during one of these aimless wanderings that I found myself standing in front of the basement door. I'd passed it 1,000 times without really seeing it. It was just part of the landscape of the house, like the coat closet or the linen cupboard. But now, with Thomas gone, it felt different, significant. The brass lock gleamed in the afternoon light, and I realized I was staring at it, my heart beating faster. Why had he been so insistent? What was down there that he'd guarded so carefully? The rational part of my brain said it was nothing. Old boxes, broken furniture, maybe some personal items from his childhood he didn't want to sort through. The basement was his private space, his boundary. I should respect that, even now. But another part that had been growing louder since his death, whispered that I had a right to know. This was my house now, my life. And Thomas, for all his gentleness and kindness, had kept secrets. I'd felt it for years, that sense of something withheld, something hidden behind his careful words and tender gestures. I needed to know. The key was in his nightstand drawer, still on its chain. I found it underneath his reading glasses and a paperback mystery novel, and I held it in my palm for a long moment, feeling its weight. My hand was shaking. "Do it," I told myself. "Just do it quickly." I walked to the basement door before I could change my mind. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, and when I turned it, something inside the mechanism groaned, as if it hadn't been opened in years. The door swung inward, revealing a steep wooden staircase descending into darkness. The smell hit me first, that musty, sweet odor I'd noticed before, but stronger now, almost overwhelming. I gagged and covered my nose with my hand. The light switch was on the wall to my right. I flipped it, and a single bare bulb flickered to life at the bottom of the stairs, casting weak yellowish light that barely pushed back the shadows. I stood at the top of the stairs for what felt like an eternity, every instinct screaming at me to close the door, lock it, forget I'd ever opened it. But my feet moved forward anyway, carrying me down step by step. The wood creaked under my weight. The air grew colder as I descended, and I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. The bare bulb swung slightly on its cord, making the shadows dance across the concrete walls. The basement was larger than I'd expected, stretching back beneath the entire footprint of the house. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with pipes and ductwork. Boxes were stacked against one wall, and there was an old workbench covered with tools I'd never seen Thomas use. But it was the far corner that drew my attention. There was a table there, illuminated by the swinging light, and on it were several cardboard boxes and what looked like photo albums. My breath caught in my throat. I walked toward them slowly, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The first box was unsealed. I lifted the flap with trembling fingers. Photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, loose and jumbled together. I picked one up and held it under the light. A woman. Young, maybe mid-20s, with long blonde hair and wide, frightened eyes. She was sitting in what looked like a basement, this basement. I realized with a jolt of horror, with her hands behind her back. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she'd been speaking or crying when the picture was taken. I dropped the photo and grabbed another one. A different woman, dark-haired, older, her face bruised and tear-stained. She was tied to a chair, her head slumped forward. Another, and another, each one worse than the last. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the photographs. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to find some innocent explanation. Maybe these were from a true crime book he was researching. Maybe they were stills from a movie. But I knew. Somewhere deep in my gut, in a place beyond reason, I knew. I opened one of the photo albums with numb fingers. The images were carefully arranged, chronologically ordered, with dates written beneath each one in Thomas's neat handwriting. July 1998, November 2000, March 2003, August 2007, January 2010. The dates stretched back more than 20 years. Every photograph showed a woman. Always in this basement, always bound, always terrified. Some were just headshots, others showed more. I couldn't look at those for long. I flipped through page after page, my stomach churning, bile rising in my throat. How many were there? 10? 15? 20? Near the end of the album, the photographs changed. The women looked different, not tied up, not obviously distressed. Just normal portraits, candid shots taken from a distance. Women at coffee shops, walking down the street, sitting in parks. Surveillance photographs. Was he watching them? Choosing them? I slammed the album shut and stepped back, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Thomas was a teacher. He was kind, gentle, patient. He helped his students, graded papers at the kitchen table, made me tea when I couldn't sleep. But he also had nightmares. He was afraid of the dark. He locked the basement door and wore the key around his neck like a talisman, because he knew what was down here, because he was afraid of what he'd done. I forced myself to open the second box. More photographs, but these were different. Older. The paper was yellowed and faded, the images slightly out of focus. The earliest date I found was 1994, 2 years before I met him, when he would have been only 22 years old. He'd been doing this for decades. In the bottom of the box, beneath the layers of photographs, I found something else. A stack of newspaper clippings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Local woman missing. Search continues for teacher 34. Police have no leads in disappearance. I recognized some of the faces from the photographs. Others I didn't. Had he kept every article, followed every case, watched as the police searched and the families grieved, and the stories eventually faded from the front page? I sank down onto the cold concrete floor, the clippings scattered around me, and I wept. Great gasping sobs that tore through my chest and left me hollow. I cried for those women, for their families, for the lives stolen and the futures erased. And I cried for myself, for the 3 years I'd spent sleeping beside a monster, loving him, trusting him, never knowing what he truly was. How could I have been so blind? But even as I asked the question, I knew the answer. He'd been careful, methodical. He'd shown me exactly what he wanted me to see: the kind teacher, the devoted husband, the man with the inexplicable fear of the dark. He'd constructed a perfect mask and worn it every day, and I'd never thought to look beneath it. I don't know how long I sat there on that basement floor, surrounded by evidence of my husband's atrocities. Time seemed to lose meaning. The bare bulb swung above me, casting its sickly light, and I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by the weight of the truth. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My legs were numb, my body aching. I picked up the photograph albums in boxes, stacking them carefully, methodically. There were 4 boxes in total, plus 3 albums. The physical documentation of horror. What was I supposed to do with this? The answer should have been obvious. Call the police, turn over the evidence, let the families finally know what happened to their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. But something held me back. If I called the police, the world would know. Everyone would know. Thomas's students, his colleagues, our neighbors. They'd know that I'd lived with him, slept with him, loved him. They'd wonder how I hadn't known. They'd look at me with suspicion, or worse, with pity. And I'd have to face the possibility that maybe I had known, on some level. That maybe I'd ignored the signs, explained away the inconsistencies, because it was easier than confronting the truth. I thought about the nights I'd heard sounds from the basement, the times I'd woken to find him gone, the way he'd always deflected my questions about his past. Had I chosen not to see? Had I been complicit in my ignorance? The thought made me sick. I carried the boxes upstairs one at a time, my muscles straining under the weight. I set them on the kitchen table and stared at them, my mind blank. I should burn them, I thought suddenly. Destroy the evidence, pretend I'd never found it. Thomas was dead. He couldn't hurt anyone else. What good would it do to expose him now? But that was a coward's thought, and I knew it. Those women deserved to be found. Their families deserved closure, and I deserved to stop protecting a man who'd never really existed. I reached for my phone, my hand trembling. I dialed the first 2 digits of 911 when I noticed something I'd missed before. The 4th box, the one I'd brought up last, had another layer beneath the photographs. I could see the edge of something else, something that had been carefully hidden at the very bottom. I set my phone down and opened the box again, digging through the pictures until I reached the bottom. There was a large manila envelope, sealed and unmarked. I tore it open and pulled out its contents. More photographs, but this time I recognized the subject immediately. Me. My hands went numb. The photos slipped from my fingers and scattered across the table. There were dozens of them. Pictures of me from before we met, standing outside the bookstore, walking to my car, sitting at a coffee shop. I was completely unaware in all of them, caught in private moments I'd thought were mine alone. He'd been watching me, stalking me. Long before that Tuesday afternoon, when he'd walked into the bookstore and asked about Rilke. Our meeting hadn't been a coincidence. It had been planned. I was shaking now, my entire body seized with tremors I couldn't control. I grabbed the envelope and turned it over, and something else fell out. A photograph of me sleeping. I was in our bed, in our bedroom, wearing the nightgown I'd worn just last week. My face was peaceful, unaware. The angle suggested it had been taken from the doorway, or maybe the foot of the bed. The date written on the back was from 2 months ago. He'd been photographing me in my sleep, documenting me, just like he'd documented all the others. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't even his partner. I was part of his collection. Another woman in his archive of victims. Except I'd survived, because he'd died first. I thought about the brain aneurysm, so sudden and unexpected. Had it been natural, or had something else caused it? Stress? fear, the weight of his secrets finally crushing him from the inside. He'd been afraid of the dark, he'd always said, but now I understood. He wasn't afraid of the darkness around him. He was afraid of the darkness inside him, the thing that drove him to hunt and capture and kill. And somehow, despite everything, he'd loved me. Or at least, he'd loved his version of me, the woman he'd chosen, photographed, studied, and claimed. It was the most horrifying gift anyone had ever given me. His twisted, possessive love had saved my life. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands, and tried to think, tried to plan. But my mind felt fractured, unable to hold on to a single thought. The clock on the wall said it was nearly midnight. I'd been in the basement for hours. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The house creaked and settled around me, and for the first time since Thomas's death, I felt truly alone. No, not alone. There was something in the house with me, something that had always been here, lurking in the corners, hiding in the locked basement, whispering through the vents. The ghost of what Thomas had been, the shadow of his crimes. And I was part of it now, connected to it, bound to it by 3 years of marriage and a lifetime of nightmares I'd never be able to forget. I looked at the photographs spread across my kitchen table, the women he'd taken, the lives he'd stolen, and my own face, captured in sleep, vulnerable and unaware. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and dialed. This time, I didn't stop. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. I took a breath. My name is Claire Thompson, I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. I need to report. I've found evidence of multiple murders in my basement. My husband, my late husband, he... The words tumbled out then, a confession of things I hadn't done but had lived beside, slept beside, loved beside for 3 years. The operator asked me to stay on the line, told me police were on the way. I sat in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and waited. 20 minutes later, red and blue lights flooded through the windows. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps on the porch. A firm knock at the door. I let them in. The police filled my house-uniformed officers, detectives, crime scene technicians. They photographed the evidence, bagged and tagged the boxes, took my statement. They asked questions I didn't have answers to. When did you know? Why didn't you report this earlier? Did you ever suspect? I told them the truth, all of it. How I'd found the key, opened the door, discovered the photographs. How I'd only learned about it after his death. How I'd been married to a stranger. They were professional, polite, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. How could you not know? How could you live with someone for 3 years and never suspect? I didn't have an answer that satisfied them. I didn't have an answer that satisfied me. It was dawn by the time they finished. They took the boxes, the albums, the photographs. Every piece of evidence was removed from my home, cataloged, and taken to the police station. They told me not to leave town. They'd have more questions. And then they were gone, and I was alone again in the empty house. I walked through the rooms as the sun rose, touching the walls, the furniture, the surfaces Thomas had touched. Everything felt contaminated now, stained by the knowledge of what he'd been. This had been our home, our life, and it had all been built on a foundation of lies and death. I ended up back in the kitchen, sitting at the table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together, where he'd graded papers and told me about his day and kissed me goodnight. My phone rang. My mother calling from 3 states away. She'd seen the news. Claire? Oh my God, Claire, is it true? I didn't answer. I hung up and turned off my phone. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded. Reporters camped outside my house. Thomas's face was on every news channel, every website. Respected teacher led double life as serial killer. Husband's secret house of horrors. The police identified 7 of the women from the photographs. Their families were notified. Some of them had been missing for over 20 years. Now, finally, they could have funerals. They could grieve and find closure. But others were never identified. Photographs of women whose names no one knew, whose families never reported them missing, who had disappeared from the world without leaving a trace. They'd only existed in Thomas's collection, and now they existed in police evidence files, Jane Doe numbers 1 through number 8. I was questioned repeatedly. They searched my phone records, my emails, my bank accounts. They interviewed everyone I knew, everyone Thomas knew. They were looking for evidence that I'd been involved, that I'd known, that I'd helped. They never found anything because there was nothing to find. But the suspicion lingered. I could feel it in the way people looked at me, the way former friends stopped returning my calls. I was the wife of a monster. I'd shared his bed, his life. How could I be innocent? I didn't know how to answer that question. 3 months after I opened the basement door, I put the house up for sale. No one would buy it. It was too notorious, too tainted. Eventually, I accepted an offer for a fraction of its value from a developer who planned to tear it down and build condos. I used the money to rent a small apartment across town, somewhere anonymous and forgettable. I quit my job at the bookstore. I deleted all my social media accounts. I became invisible. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the one photograph I kept. Not the ones of me sleeping, the police took those. But before they arrived, I'd slipped one picture into my pocket. Just one. It's a photo of Thomas and me on our wedding day. We're standing on the courthouse steps, smiling at the camera. His arm is around my waist, and I'm holding a bouquet of peonies. We look happy, normal, like any couple beginning their life together. I stare at that photograph for hours, trying to see the truth beneath the surface, trying to find some hint, some shadow, some tiny crack in the mask that would have warned me. But I never do. He looks exactly like what he pretended to be, a kind man, a good man, someone I could trust. That's what haunts me most. Not the photographs in the basement, not the women he killed, not the double life he led. It's the fact that I never saw it, never felt it, never knew. How well do we ever really know another person? How many basements are locked, secrets kept, darkness hidden behind a gentle smile? I don't have answers. All I know is that I wake up every morning in my small anonymous apartment and I check every room. I open every door. I look in every closet and under the bed and in the spaces where shadows gather. Because I learned the hardest way possible that the monsters aren't always where you expect them. Sometimes they're sleeping beside you, whispering, "I love you," as they turn out the light. Sometimes they're afraid of the dark, because they know exactly what lives inside it. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you survive to tell the story. But survival isn't the same as living. I'm still here, in this apartment, in this half-life between the woman I was and whoever I'm becoming. The police closed the case months ago. 7 families had funerals. 8 Jane Does remain in evidence storage, waiting for someone to claim them. And I remain too unclaimed, untethered, a widow to a ghost who never existed. Every night, I dream of that basement. The swinging light bulb, the cold concrete, the boxes of photographs. But in my dreams, when I open the albums, the faces are different. They're all me. Different ages, different times, different moments. A comprehensive documentation of a life watched, studied, possessed. And in the last photograph, I'm lying in bed, eyes closed, peacefully sleeping. But in the dream, I know I'm not sleeping. I wake up gasping, covered in sweat, reaching for a light switch that will never make the darkness go away. Because Thomas was right about one thing. There is something to be afraid of in the dark. It's the parts of ourselves we never want to see. The capacity for evil we pretend doesn't exist. The thin line between love and obsession, protection and possession, safety and danger. He was afraid of his own darkness. And now I'm afraid too. Not of basements or locked doors or mysterious sounds in the night, but of the knowledge that I loved someone capable of such horror. That I was chosen by him, claimed by him, nearly collected by him. That I was, for 3 years, Mrs. Thomas Harding. And I will carry that name, that history, that shadow, for the rest of my life. The basement is gone now, The house is gone. The physical evidence is filed away in police storage. But the darkness remains. It lives in me now, as it lived in him. And every time I close my eyes, I see the photographs, the women he took, and the woman I almost became.